Hey everybody, welcome to episode 28 of Pealed Back's LiveCast Conversations with. Today I am joined by my good friend Sue Solymosi. Let me tell you about Sue. Sue is a mortgage broker, a podcaster, a JCI senator, an national executive vice president, I'm not done yet, community leader, fitness trainer, mother, and wife. Sue's married to a great guy named Pete, and they have 3 wonderful children, and they live an active lifestyle here in the Okanagan Valley. Sue's been in the banking and mortgage industry since 2007. As a mortgage broker, she is dedicated to offering knowledgeable advice and creative solutions. Since every client has their own unique story, and trust me, I know that from personal experience working with her, and she has a strong background in the industry, giving her a distinct advantage and a perspective when providing top-level customer service for her clients. Whether you're purchasing a home for the first time, taking equity from your home for investments or pleasure, or your current mortgage is simply up for renewal, it's important that you're making an educated buying decision with a professional who's got some unbiased advice. When that's not keeping her busy enough, she also spends her time working with Junior Chamber International, or JCI, creating impact through business, personal, and community involvement. Sue is the 2021 JCI Canada EVP. In 2020, she hosted JCI Canada's podcast and kicked that off, earned her senatorship, and continues to be an extremely active member of the organization. She's also a part-time fitness instructor, which is like, the things just keep stacking up. She works with Soul Studio, located in Vernon, British Columbia, and love to give a big shout out to the virtual platforming classes that are going on through there as well. She and Serena are working on potentially a new podcast centered around Soul Studio and fitness and everything else. So, Sue, those are a lot of great words, and you have a lot of great things on the go. Thank you for being on the show. I don't even know how you made time today for
it. Thanks for having me, Jean. It's a pretty crazy day. I was driving to my home office thinking, how did I carve out time today? I probably should just keep working.
Well, that's a huge list of things. Won't you, I'm sure there's a lot more stories tied behind that and where you're at with it. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about all those journeys that you want. You've had quite the journey on JCI and the journey in the mortgage broker and becoming your own, kind of graduating to your own boss type deal.
Yeah, it's been a long road. When I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to go to university. I knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I actually started down the road of becoming a teacher and then realized that wasn't the right path for me.
Right.
And I wanted to major in French. I've studied French a ton, but I never took the opportunity to travel. Like if you're learning a language, you probably should go be in that language. And I didn't ever take that step. So where I ended up was in my 5th year of university with another 30 credits to get to my graduating point, and I hit a wall. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I need to stop spending money on classes that I have no idea. I'm not even focusing on them anymore because they don't make any sense. So at that point, I took a break. I took a step back and I thought, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I thought, well, my mom's a mortgage broker and she's pretty good at it. Actually, she's amazing at it. So I don't, maybe I'll give that a shot and see if I like it. I did the course over the course of about 9 months, passed the test, got my license, then told my mom that I became a mortgage broker. And the rest is history on the mortgage broker path. Turns out I really like it. It ties in all the components of what I like to do with myself, working with people, working with numbers. I was always a math student in high school. Finding creative solutions, problem solving, all that fun stuff. So you just made my face really big. So that
I did.
So it worked out really well. I met Pete somewhere in amidst all that. And he encouraged me to go back to university and finish my degree anyways, even though I didn't know what I was doing with it. So now I have an arts degree and doing the mortgage brokering. And the thing about JCI, I grew up in Vernon. I've been in Vernon my whole life. I moved away to Kelowna down the valley for 4 or 5 years, and then I came back to Vernon. And I was never really part of the community. I didn't really know what it meant to be part of a community until I joined JCI. I joined JCI and I started meeting business people. I started meeting people in the nonprofit sector. I started meeting people through the city and realizing that there are other people out there, same age as me, around the same age as me, that are just like me, that are excited about life and want to be involved. And that's when I really started to feel part of a community. That community aspect is huge.
Well, how about you explain what JCI is? Because there might be people that watch this have never heard of it and go, what is this JCI thing?
Mm-hmm. Oh, you want me to explain what JCI
Yeah.
is? JCI is Junior Chamber International. So we are a worldwide organization of young, active people who want to make a difference in the world, people who want to create positive change, whatever that means in your own community. The cool thing about JCI is that you go into this amazing network of people who are. Can you hear my dogs barking? Sorry.
It's fine. Mine was barking earlier, so.
You're part of this amazing community of like-minded individuals who everybody just kind of jumps on board together and goes out to spread their positivity, to create change all around the world. I mean, when I hosted the podcast last year for JCI Canada, I interviewed one of our international vice presidents who was in Iceland. I interviewed our Secretary General of the international organization who was in Monaco, sitting in his home office over the bay in Monaco, like pretty incredible. I interviewed our world president who was in Zimbabwe through virtual platforms, and we were able to make those connections around the world. So yeah, JCI is about making connections and using those connections to create positive change.
Yeah, and like you say, there's chapters located all over the world, like what, 250,000 members worldwide, roughly?
Somewhere around there. I think COVID hit us hard. It's really tough to stay focused on creating change in the world when you're just trying to stay above water.
Yeah.
Right, for the most part, emotionally and financially and everything else. So we're starting to get back on track as an organization. Yeah.
Well, it takes time, right? Like, yeah. And it's as well, like sometimes that positive change happens right for yourself through JCI more than anything else is. So as well, I'm not just a member, I'm a senator as well. So I've been able to enjoy the benefits of connecting with people in my own backyard where I've lived I lived here for 10 years before I joined JCI, and now I have friend circle that is like, I don't think I've ever experienced what it has given me ever in my life. And being able to do that and the opportunities to be involved at the board level, to do all the events, it's just like, it's the self-development component of it that really starts to go, oh, what else am I capable of? Like, we had that comment, at least locally, it's a safe place to fail, and it gives you that growth to be able to do some really awesome stuff.
Jean, I remember the first time, I don't know if we met, but the first time I saw you is when you competed in the effective speaking competition at our regional convention in 2016. Ooh. Do you remember?
I almost had a little moment of like, oh man, I was afraid of being in front of people back then.
You were, and I could tell, but you stepped out of your comfort zone, right? And that's the cool thing, is we watch members learn and grow through opportunities that are provided within the organization. And look at you now.
Hey, now I'm talking. Rise and shine, right? But it's very true. Like, I can still remember doing, even at our local chapter level, stepping up to go, all right, if I'm going to be part of JCI, like the big thing about being in any group is like actually putting the action in and showing up, right? So whenever there was an opportunity to do that, took it, right? Like if there's a speaking competition, be like, well, what a great opportunity. We did effective speaking training, shout out to Shane Sonderman for doing that here locally. Like it's just an opportunity to be better, and you get some really good feedback, and it's not criticism. It's like everybody really wants people to be better, right? And like I was literally shaking like when I did it locally, and it was probably like shaking when I did it at that be like looking around, here's a room of almost 100 people that you're having to walk through and be like, I got this, and deep down in my mind I'm like, you don't got this apart.
A good example of JCI support and being able to take your ideas and make them into something. The podcast for JCI Canada. So the idea was, Jean, I think it was you and I were on the phone with Neil Fitzgerald, who this year is our international vice president. And we were talking about ideas for growth and development of JCI Canada on the national level. And Neil said, I think he just in passing made a comment about podcasting and how the JCI USA had been podcasting, and it was a really cool thing, and something lit up in my brain, and I was like, we need to do this. And so this is I had the platform. I had the support from the national board. I spent 6 months developing this podcast and then hosted it for a year and then handed it over to the next host, who's doing an amazing job so far. And now this idea that started in just a little conversation turned into something that I heard a couple of weeks ago, that the JCI Canada podcast is super popular in South America.
Really?
And it was awarded the best, I think it was the best marketing strategy in the Americas, so North and South America, for 2020.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. That's really awesome. Like, that's incredible. Like, but maybe let's pull that back a little bit about getting to that point, right? Like you technically have an award-winning podcast that you've developed. So like, that's not a small thing. And that's from communities that are outside of our own nation, outside of our own continent. Like that is really, really awesome to have. What was it like getting to the point of being able to do that, right? Now, and hopefully you'll be open to sharing some of the challenges around that, just like that, oh, can I do this? All the way to where you got this.
Yeah. So when I do something, I want to do it right. I want to do it the right way, and I want to do it the right way the first time. I don't want to mess up. The thing is, like, I went into this podcast with the intention of creating something cool for JCI Canada, for a place for our members to go and listen, to find information, to hear a familiar voice, and have that connection. We launched it. I launched it. It was launched before. What's the best way to say that? I launched it. We launched it.
You're the driving force behind it. It's okay to, and it's humble still to say that. But you did have help.
I did have help. Yeah. What was I going to say?
Well, we were talking about like the journey, actually being able to get to the point, or it sounded like you were talking about you like to do everything perfect the first time, right? And what is it? What does that mean when you're trying to do something perfect the first time that you've never done before?
It's overwhelming, right? That it's almost debilitating if you don't know what the first step is supposed to be or what it's supposed to look like. And this is with anything, with fitness. I'm a fitness instructor as well. With anybody walking into a gym for the first time, walking into a new class for the first time, trying out a new fitness routine, trying to do a headstand with push-ups, Jean. If you don't take the first step, it's never going to happen. And the first step is the scary one. Mm-hmm. What I was going to say though, when we launched the podcast, I wasn't thinking to myself, this is going to be award winning. This is going to be huge. It's going to be heard, listened to all over the world. I was just thinking, this is going to be really good for JCI Canada. It's going to be something cool. We'll see what happens. Yeah. And I set goals. And people, you hear in any training that you do, any coach that you talk to, they're going to tell you just to set SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable. I'm forgetting all of the. Tell me, Gene. Coach.
See, I'm not a proponent of the SMART goal per se because of the time barrier around it. It gets people stuck. But I understand it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound, right? Yeah. Like, so what's your timeline around it to help start to frame that up for you've got a big thing you want to accomplish, a big, hairy, audacious goal, which is like launch a podcast. What are all the little pieces that you have?
What are all the little pieces? What's the first step to launching a podcast? And there isn't really a right first step. You kind of have a topic. Like I'm working on the podcast right now that we're working on for Soul Studio. We kind of have an idea of what we want to talk about, and we have a name for it. And we're going to do a recording on Friday and see what happens. Nice.
Well, compare and contrast starting your new Soul Studio podcast versus where you were when you started the JCI Canada one. Like, so what is, I've got the question about what would be that piece of advice you would give yourself back then, but like, how's that different now? And is that showing up as a quicker way of going, oh, okay, I don't need to get tripped up in, is it perfect? Is it moving? Right. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but.
But that's exactly it, right? At this point now, I'm like, I don't have a timeline. I don't have structure. And typically I always like to have timeline, structure, prepared, read all of the instructions first, write all my notes, make sure I understand them, ask the questions, go back. With this time, putting together this podcast with Serena, it's like, her and I talk like you and I talk, Gene. Like there doesn't really ever seem to be an end to the conversation. There's always lots of things to say and lots of inspiring thoughts and words and things around what we do at Soul Studio. So I think it's going to come together really nicely. When we, I keep saying when we, with the JCI Canada podcast, it was a big black hole, and I really had no idea what I was getting into. Just that someone was giving me a microphone. Someone was giving me a microphone and the opportunity to talk to lots of people, and that was pretty cool. So there's lots of components as far as like audio, collecting the audio, distributing the audio, making sure that it goes to the right places so that it hits all the different platforms. I didn't know how that worked. So the first time I tried publishing, I thought, okay, well, I've got this content. Ran around at National Convention in 2019, collecting a bunch of content, not thinking about the audio quality of any of it. It was crap because we did it outside and there was no, anyway, I had this content. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try publishing this content to see what happens. And it didn't buffer properly. The audio kind of fell apart and there were gaps in the audio when it published. So it sounded terrible. It was terrible. And within a day, I had published it and I took it back down again. And I wanted to throw the whole thing in the garbage. I was so frustrated. And then who was I talking to? I was talking to someone and they said, oh, it was Trevor. He said, you're learning something here, aren't you? Is there something you can learn in this opportunity, in this situation that can help you make it better next time? And I was like, no, I'm so mad at myself that I'm not learning right now. So what I did was I found another friend of mine who does podcasting and video type stuff here in Vernon. And I had him draw me a picture. He drew me a picture with like all like the branches on where all the podcast things get distributed and how it all works. And then it started to make sense. Oh, I have it right here.
Oh, you're prepared. You
This
still
is my
got it.
computer. No, I keep it in my little notebook. Podcast. This is where all the things go.
Yeah.
From recording to editing to distributing your media host, your podcast platforms, and then this is just like a little, yeah.
Your cheat sheet to explain the backbone behind it all.
Yeah. I understand it all now, but I keep this little piece of paper as a reminder
Where you came from.
of where it came from. Yeah. So that's podcasting.
So obviously you didn't wrap it all up, slam it into the garbage and storm away and say, obviously I can't do this because I didn't do it right the first time. So
I wanted to. I was tempted.
So then you had, so you pulled down that episode. What was the process of going through it to make it ready to be able just to put that first one up there?
I needed multiple. I was only using one piece of software. I needed multiple pieces of software for recording, for editing, for the distribution side of things. And I'm trying to think of all the different, there was a few different. So I branched out, tried to learn a few different platforms. Jamie Greenhoff, who was the podcast editor with me last year on the JCI Canada podcast, he and I decided to do a podcast. There was a podcast course at the Kelowna Library where they taught us about the editing software and like the bones of creating a podcast. I think that was like November, maybe, before I launched January 1st, 2020. So we did that course, and I started to feel a little bit more confident with what it was that we were doing and understanding. Once you there's so many aspects to podcasting that it takes a while. It's overwhelming. It takes a while, and then once you get it, all the pieces come together, and it.
So what I'm hearing from you is that there was this, great idea, huge amounts of excitement were happening, and then you start to step into it, going, I don't know what are the next steps. Overwhelm coming up, and then you're like, I'm learning a lot more about the steps that are involved. Overwhelm's getting high. And then at some point you hit a crescendo and that overwhelm started to drop and you start to find your rhythm with it.
Mm-hmm. And I set a timeline. I wanted to publish an episode every 2 weeks, which was ambitious. But what is life if we're not a little ambitious with things? Makes it exciting.
Yeah.
I wanted to publish every 2 weeks. And I think I stuck to that as best I could. I think there was 2 or 3 times that I had to skip an episode for whatever reason, but I don't think people were sitting there looking at their calendar going, Sue,
where is it? Why is it not out?
That was a big piece I had to get over too, right? Like, we're broadcasting to however many people are listening to this podcast. I needed to turn that part of my brain off, thinking about how everybody else is receiving the podcast, and just trust that the message I'm putting out there is good. It's positive. It's from my heart. And so I just had to trust that was going to resonate for some people.
Yeah. And obviously it did, it was, I don't know, like what I think is so interesting about it is people that are willing to, even though it hurts inside, but to take that first step is so important. You get smacked around a little bit and then take the next step. And if looking back over just 12 months, the amount of knowledge and experience that you gained, because how many episodes did you end up doing? It was
40.
That's a lot, right? That's a lot of content to go through, and that's a lot of interviews and a lot of perfecting, how to talk to people, perfecting how you're gonna do it. And from what I hear is that that first couple were a little bouncy because you had to figure out what platforms to use, and I think you even switched platforms at one point to get things a little bit better. Right, for distributing and making sure the sound, little things like the sound quality on the different platforms is different, all those things that you learn, but there's no way going into it that you'd be able to anticipate them. So there's a component of being really open to the learning of it, and being okay, I want to have the voice out. Is having the voice out more important than it being perfect?
That's true. And I don't know that I would have taken that next step to learn the extra components or the extra pieces that I needed to know if I didn't publish the first episode.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm not just keeping a backlog of episodes that I'm not publishing because they're not perfect. If I don't publish them, I'm not going to learn from them.
Yeah.
I did listen to every episode like 20 times because I'm neurotic. But I mean, there's a lot of that, like, it could translate into my job as a mortgage broker. Mm-hmm. Taking the first step, being that trusted consultant for people, sharing my expertise and my wisdom, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's in a private meeting with clients. It really, doing the podcast really lent to me being more confident in myself and in the words that I put out into the world.
Right. Well, you just beat me to my next question about how is that spilled into the rest of your life?
When I first met Pete, he invited me. Our first date was his 30th birthday barbecue. He had a barbecue at his house. It was on Friday, the 13th of July. Freaky Friday barbecue at Pete's, he called it. This is when Facebook was like first starting. We met in 2007. And so I got this invite. We'd only known each other a couple of weeks. We had just been talking back and forth. And so he invited me to this barbecue. And I thought, I'm not going to know a single person there. We're from two completely different worlds. But you know what? If I'm going to be a mortgage broker, if I'm going to put myself out there in these situations in the business world, I should be able to go to a casual barbecue with people I don't know and be okay with it. So that's where it started. I went to the Freaky Friday barbecue at Pete's, and seems like that was the right choice.
Yeah, wow. It's worked out well for you so far.
So far, yeah.
So far. But so like it's about taking that first step then, yeah, and going, what I'm going to, if you're starting something new, knowing the first one's going to be the worst one, but it's also going to be the best one. Then the next one, that just kind of continues on, right? You have this opportunity to make your next best one.
That's a pretty cool thought. I read something about, and I want to know what your opinion is on this, about being careful about being vulnerable. Because I see taking that first step as showing a little bit of vulnerability, being okay with being vulnerable, showing people that side of you that isn't perfect, polished, whatever it is. But what I read was that you need to be careful with what you're vulnerable about. And I kind of thought, well, how do you moderate that? How do you censor?
Well, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
I'd almost call like bullshit on it, because if you're censoring what you're being vulnerable about, are you really being vulnerable? Like, if you're going to get right down to the core
where I would say, shut up, Gene.
You've never said that before when I've poked and prodded at those little, but you know, maybe that's a prime example. Is like, would a good friend let you get away with what you just said and be like, oh, I'm being vulnerable? Be like, are you really? Like, that's the candy coating shell. Like, man, that's you know what? I'll simply say I think that's bullshit. I think there's levels of things that you're going to share around different people, and maybe I'll just backtrack on that a little bit. But like, I think there's a time and place for the right things to come out. And if you're going to talk on a topic of something, then you may as well go, like, be prepared to let other people in. And I think, or let a little bit of the softness come out from it, right? Like, whatever you're trying to protect in that scope of that conversation, let it show up.
Mm-hmm. But you said it. You said just let a little bit of that softness come up. Just a little bit.
Just it's. I get what they're trying to say, And I've lived by that as well. Like, I think we all have a set of shields that are up at any time. Is like, I don't know. Now I'm second guessing myself. What is your thoughts on?
My thoughts, I mean, yeah, I think that there's some validity to it, in that, like, you're not going to walk into a business meeting and talk about all the crap in your life, right?
No.
Like, that's not. And so I think that's kind of what they're referring to, is like, you're not just verbal diarrhea over everything, over everyone, right? Like,
yeah. And I think that that's content over vulnerability, right? Like,
yeah,
vulnerability doesn't mean I'm walking up to somebody and going, "Hey, here's my life story." I don't think that's necessarily like vulnerable. But maybe it could be if it's being genuine, right? Like, maybe that's the flip of it. It's like, what you're saying important to what's happening. Are you listening to, we have 2 ears, one mouth. Like, are we actually taking in the story that's being generated? Do we have something important to add to it? Does our story of that situation actually impact what's happening? And if it does, I say, like, being vulnerable enough just to put yourself into that conversation and bringing all of you out, and not sidelining yourself on your values, not sidelining yourself on your own honor and respect, and conducting yourself in a professional or respectful manner. That to me is more of a definition of vulnerability than just going, here's all the scary things that happen in my mind. Be like, I don't think that's the true vulnerability. Like, are you going to be vulnerable enough to live up to your values and your code of ethics all the time, regardless of it?
Humans have that unique ability to be able to sense when people are being their true selves, when they're being real with you, versus I'm being strategically vulnerable right now to suck you in.
Well, that's the
like that could be a rabbit hole. We don't have to go.
Oh, I know. No, that's like a sociopath trying to learn how to use empathy or fake empathy to bring people in, right? Like, that's a manipulation tactic at that point. So you're not actually being vulnerable. You're being this is my show, so I can say it, prick, right? Like, you're being an asshole if that's what you're doing. So yeah, like, are you being genuine to who you truly are?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting. I found that podcasting is a real passion for me, which is cool, because I wasn't expecting to find my passion in doing something like that, but here it is. And we're talking about vulnerability, and we're talking about what to share. And what I learned over the year of doing the JCI Canada podcast is how to have conversations, how to have real conversations with real people, and actually listen to what they have to say and contribute to the conversation, so we can talk back and forth and it's easy to listen to.
Yeah. You get to find your voice a little bit, right?
At least I hope that's what I've been doing. Yeah, you find your voice, but you also find I found, as much as I'm a good listener, I mean, people, friends and whatever else, it's totally different when you're in an interview setting. Because my mind is like constantly thinking ahead to the next question, and thinking about what people are going to be saying and how I should respond, and then try to do it in French. I had to do a couple of interviews in French, and then I'm trying to translate on top of that, instead of just relaxing in the conversation, having the structure. Pete and I were talking about this, and I'm completely sidetracking and going on to a different topic.
It's all good.
We were talking about this last week in setting up your content for each episode. So what I did for the JCI Canada podcast was I laid out the 26 weeks, 26 published dates, and the general content that I wanted and the people that I wanted to interview. Whenever I asked people if they would join me on the podcast for an interview, almost always I was asked to give a list of questions. What are you going to ask me so I can prepare my answers? And at first I was like, yep, totally, I can do that. That makes sense. And then as I got into the groove of it, I'm like, I can't provide a list of questions because I'm going to ask this question and I don't know how you're going to answer it. Because if you answer it one way, then we can go in one direction. Like, right, like there's like this live cast right here. You didn't give me a list of questions.
And that probably drove you nuts.
But in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, yeah, because I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, you're right. Like, I think it takes away from the authenticity of that conversation, right? Because the conversation does become like a bit of a rabbit's hole, right? Like, for the live cast, I describe it as like, I know my bookends and then everything else in the middle is all winging it because I don't know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk, we start with your profile and then it just kind of like goes and a conversation happens. And like, just like we are right now, all of a sudden, 36 minutes later, we are still down a different conversation than if we would have tried to like, preset that up, and it would not have felt it wouldn't have felt as good, or it wouldn't have been as connection as the connection would be, right? Like I had a lot of people that have been on this one going, okay, great, like what kind of questions are you going to ask me? Be like, I don't know yet, and they're like, okay. I'm like, trust me, like,
you say about yourself.
Be like, like now we're on episode 28 of this show, and it's worked out, and I just have a little bit of faith in just having a good conversation, right? Like it's about trying to line up the people or the voices you want to have on that and seeing where it goes. Like there is a little bit of seeing where it goes because there's so many people out there that have incredible stories, and sometimes they even forget about it until you just ask that question or ask it in a different way. I had a guest actually last week, Alyssa, who's like a coach, and afterwards she's like, you kind of like threw me off because the way you asked the questions made me tell my story in reverse, and it came out differently, and it was like a really kind of really cool piece of feedback to have.
That is a really cool piece of feedback. So you learned something about your interview style.
Yeah, right. Well, it really comes down to like just being curious about somebody, right? Like they're just asking them where they come from. Like, great where you're at, but what was the things that got you there? And then you just start working it backwards, right? Like just like we have today. We started working backwards. We've talked about your JCI time. We talked about why JCI is important, flipped it into the podcast, talked about vulnerability. And now we're going down this, line of talking around conversational and why questions and listening and back and really turning this into a dyad is so important.
It's important to, I think, to have a general idea and then go forth from there instead of giving like a full structure, because then it's scripted. It's scripted and it's harder to listen to someone reading off of a piece of paper.
Yeah. Well, and it's a little bit, we'll flip it back to the effective speaking time. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking. All the things you've got to remember and be perfect at. Or you could just be like, well, here's cool. I'm going to have a great conversation with Sue about her journey. And you've got so many that we could have went down so many different paths. We've ended up here.
We've ended up here.
That now we get to hear about how somebody who's never done podcasting before stepped into that. So I'm going to do 26, ended up crushing out 44, has won an international award for best marketing, content for JCI. Like that's huge. And then to hear about how, being able to step into it and hold these conversations over those 44 episodes are now influencing your outside of life with it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the cool thing about JCI, and we talked about it a lot on the podcast, is that it influences the rest of your life. You learn things in JCI that you can apply to the real world. It's like life university. Here's you want to learn how to do something? Go do it. And we're going to be your safety net for when you fail and need to learn a few more things. And then you can rebuild from there. It's pretty cool.
It is a safe place to fail.
For sure.
Yes.
And so the new podcast is going to be called Soulcast.
I love it. When's it going to launch?
Our goal is to have 2 episodes out in March.
Nice. Are you going to stay at the two a month type thing?
We'll see. Maybe one or 2 a month, depending on how the timing goes. But, we want to talk about, and this is something else. Oh man, we could talk forever, Gene.
We usually do.
We want to talk about, what it means to be successful.
Yeah.
Both Serena and I come from working in family businesses. And then her, I've kind of followed her around in her fitness journey and have grown myself there. And now we get to do this podcast together, which I'm really excited about. So what does it mean to be successful? And I wanted to say on here that I see success as more of a mindset, right? Like it's in the eye of the beholder. It's how you perceive what it is that you're doing. I feel like I'm successful. This is right for me.
Right.
And we want to talk about how Soul Studio pivoted through COVID. But like really the virtual class setup that she has now is incredible. And she's blowing up on TikTok right now.
Oh, cool.
I'm not a big TikToker. I only got TikTok so I could follow Soul Studio.
Well, better give her TikTok handle a shout out then.
Is there a handle? I don't even know what that means.
It's like her little username at.
Hang on. I'm pulling it up. At Soul Studio? Oh my. Okay.
At Soul Studio?
I think so. Soul Studio CA. At Soul Studio CA.
There, just added that as a little comment. Big shout out to Serena then. And, obviously, maybe you guys will be utilizing that platform to share snippets of what you're going to be discussing too.
We'll see. I think I'm looking at podcasts as a totally different demographic of people than people that are going to, like, consumers of something like TikTok or YouTube. Video content is very different than audio content.
Big time.
Different level of commitment, different type of person. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
That's awesome. Well, we're at 43 minutes, and you know how at the start of this I said that time's going to fly by. So I want to be respectful of your time. This has been incredible to have you on the show. So as I ask everybody from our conversation, what is one piece of advice if you could jump in a time machine, go back 10 years, open it up, and there's Sue? Would you be like, hey, I have this to tell you?
Yeah, I would tell myself to relax. Relax. Life is going to happen. And as long as you're putting your best foot forward, you're putting your heart into it, things are going to fall into place. You don't need to have every single step of the way mapped out. You don't have to have a precise timeline from now until the day that you die. It doesn't work like that. Life is more of a journey if you can just relax and go with it.
I love that. That's becoming a quote. That's quotable stuff right there. That is incredible piece of advice to take back for yourself.
Thanks.
So Sue, again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime. You're welcome on anytime. So everybody, this has been episode 28 of LiveCast. Peeled Back's LiveCast Conversation With, and we had Sue Solymosi on. So everybody, until next Wednesday, find your one thing to be grateful for. All right, everybody, talk to you later.